On this episode, we have Greg Lane, N4KGL, and we are covering the RaDAR Challenge. This is the Field Radio Podcast. I am your host, John Jacobs, W7DBO, Whiskey 7 Delta Bravo Oscar. Thank you for clicking and tuning in and joining us on this podcast. If this is your first time listening, thank you for giving it a try, and you can find more information about the podcast at fieldradiopodcast.org. A couple items of update before we bring Greg on. We were just 2 months away from Dayton Hamvention. I'm excited to announce we picked up our first title sponsor for the event. We are still working towards meeting our goal for live stream coverage of the event, but we are a short 2 months away. If you are an amateur-related company and would like to sponsor the Dayton coverage, or if you know someone who is, there are varying levels of sponsorship available. If you would like some cool field radio gear and would like to help fund the trip, there are individual sponsor options available also. You can find all of this information on our website at fieldradiopodcast.org. A couple other items on the horizon. This week is the second annual Utah Digital Communications Conference that I help host here locally in Utah that is dedicated to digital modes in amateur radio. I will capture some of the keynote and breakout sessions, so look for those to come out in a few weeks when I get them edited. Lastly, I have shot some videos on some new NVIS techniques that are sitting on the video editor. I want to do an episode on NVIS, or Near Vertical Incident Skywave propagation, and different techniques to make that happen. If this is an area you have expertise in, or know someone who does, and would be interested in being a guest on the show, please drop me a line at john@fieldradiopodcast.org. Our guest this week is Greg Lane, N4KGL. Greg is an avid RaDAR enthusiast. You might ask, what is the RaDAR Challenge? RaDAR is short for Rapid Deployment Amateur Radio. The goal is to practice communication via amateur radio under difficult and strenuous circumstances in many different ways, and being ever ready and independent of external resources until the practice becomes second nature. The unique aspect of RaDAR is adding movement to outdoor operating. That is, stations rapidly deploy, move with all necessary gear, and redeploy. This is a stress test of operating capabilities, but can be an enjoyable and rewarding when undertaken in the great outdoors. In this interview, Greg gives us more insight into the program and gives us his techniques on being successful in the challenge. We'd like to welcome to the show Greg Lane, N4KGL of Panama City, Florida. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thank you, John.
So you talked to me a little bit a while ago about getting involved in RaDAR, and so I thought that would be a great topic for the show. But before we get started, tell us about your amateur radio operator history.
All right, John. I got involved with amateur radio when I was a teen, and I told my dad I wanted to be a CB operator, and he quickly said, "No, you don't. You want to be a ham." He had a friend where he worked that was a ham. So along about the 8th grade, I got the novice test and passed. Had lots of fun as a novice. And around town, I had 3 other kind of teenage buddies, and we were hams. And so that's what we would chat about and visit with each other and visit other hams in the area. And we had a local club, which I wasn't that involved with, but field day came along. My recollection is that someone brought over a generator and just left it to us kids, which would probably be pretty rare today. But I think that was a great experience with my friends, staying up all night and having fun with field day, setting up and going through the whole process. Not that we knew what we were doing, but we enjoyed learning. And, of course, went through high school and, what are you going to do? Somehow I thought electrical engineering had something in common with amateur radio. So I just decided I'd be an electrical engineer. And fortunately, I was able to go to college and get that degree. And the courses never got easy. So ham radio, it helped, but it was still pretty tough. I'll fast forward a bit. Well, I'll say that along about 1983, moved to Panama City from Tennessee, bought a house that had these huge power lines over the backyard. And I just said to myself, well, the house is nice. I'll just give up ham radio. It was a bad move, but I did for 25 years. And of course, that time my kids were growing up. And I got into rocketry, which was not a hobby that I had. Really still enjoy rocketry, but along it came, well, maybe I should get back into amateur radio. Maybe I can tie that to rocketry. So about 10 years ago, I took, I had let my license expire, so I took all 3 tests, which I think was good, again, because it kind of updated me on the hobby. My first rig was ICOM 703. It wasn't all that expensive, and I said, well, maybe I'll go with this QRP thing. Got my CW back, participated in the Straight Key Century Club. So I was back into amateur radio, and I was making trips for work. So I would take my ICOM and kind of set up at the hotel the best way I could. At one hotel, I had a full-size 40-meter dipole that I snuck in. But that was a lot of fun, trying to be stealth. I got an assignment for 6 weeks in Italy, operated over there. DX comes pretty easy in Italy because you're surrounded by it. Continuing on, portable hotel, parking lot type operations was kind of where I was at. Then I discovered this concept called rapid deployment amateur radio, or RaDAR.
So before we move on, how do you exactly smuggle in a dipole 40 meter and get it into a hotel?
Well, actually, I was there about 2 weeks, so I didn't start with a 40-meter dipole. I actually had a buddy stick. I stuck that out of the hotel window. But as the days went on, I just got braver and braver, and I did have a second floor room. So, I was throwing wires out the windows, so to speak. Under the cover of darkness, there was a roof below me of an entryway. But anyway, in the cover of darkness, I would string the ends out at night. This was before 9/11 and all that, so nobody was watching or they didn't care.
So with RaDAR, first of all, give everybody kind of the high-level overview of what RaDAR is, and specifically, I enjoy why they call it's the RaDAR Challenge. So it has some unique things that make it a little more challenging than your typical QSO contest.
RaDAR was originated by Eddie Layton, ZS6B&E in South Africa. He was is a long-distance runner. He combined amateur radio. And this was the days before the compact equipment that we have. So he would put various radio equipment in his pack and run. Of course, that was the kind of genesis of it. But Eddie really loves amateur radio, and he and his friends in South Africa came up with this concept of somehow combining movement with amateur radio and outdoor operating. This concept has been refined over a number of years. I didn't originate this. Essentially, the rules existed, and it was listed with the South African Radio League. Ham in the U.S., Marcus Kessler in Arkansas, discovered Eddie and posted RaDAR America. So he was bringing the idea of RaDAR over to America. In terms of movement, the rules are pretty flexible. You can move by foot, can move by pretty much a bicycle, a canoe, so forth. But basically, it's about deploying rapidly, then moving a prescribed distance. For walking, it is, or by foot, it is 1 kilometer, and then redeploy and make 5 more contacts and keep this process up. So when you put a time limit on it, like 4 hours, which we have now in the RaDAR Challenge, it's a fast-paced thing. And preliminaries is planning and obviously learning what type of equipment that you can take to do this rapid deployment. Fortunately, there are radios like the KX3, the FT817, and there's a lot of others available now. But you would need to make choices about radios and antennas that you could deploy rapidly. A magnetic loop. I've just fallen in love with the Alex loop among all the magnetic loops. But you have to make the choices, and you may travel very light. It's an advantage to travel very light. You would like to minimize your battery weight, your pack weight, the whole thing. But there's always the question, is the Alex loop enough for me to make 5 contacts quickly? Do I need to deploy a dipole? Do I need to use a vertical? All these questions are wide open to whoever gets involved with RaDAR. So I had to answer these things for myself, and there's no one answer because you're always refining it. You're doing something new. You get better at it. So the RaDAR challenge currently is 4-hour period on the first Saturday of April and November. The third Saturday of July was added. And the interesting thing is that RaDAR has really gone global. And so it's no longer just South Africa or the United States. It's Great Britain, Canada, Finland, really around the world. So there's no one good time for everybody to be on. So you get to pick your own 4-hour period. And you're on the hook to make 5 contacts at the first stop. So you have to decide, well, what band am I going to use? Again, the antenna. And what might I leverage on the air to help this go faster? It is encouraged that you have operators help you if you can get them. Also, it's encouraged to make radar to radar contacts, that's challenging, and even radar to radar intercontinental contacts. So one thing that I didn't mention is that this can be done anywhere, but I live in Northwest Florida. We have very good weather, and we have many, many parks, city parks, state parks, not many national parks, but I enjoy getting outdoors. So that's really an element of this is operating outdoors.
With having to move every 5 contacts, I take it's not a field day where the number 3 item on your pack list is a barbecue with the ribs. It's 4 hours. Like, it is pretty fast paced for 4 hours. Do they prescribe anything like a mission, like you have to start traveling a certain direction? Are you free to kind of make your own path as long as you travel a certain amount of distance between your sets of 5?
It's completely up to each person to pick their venue, and if they like, they can plan this out and get on Google and draw it out, or it could be impromptu. And it's really any way that you can get that distance in. You can even loop back to where you began if you wanted, but it's a lot more interesting to continue on. And one of my favorite places is the state park here. It has a golf side and let's call it a bay side. In particular, I wanted to mention that I enjoy, it's been real effective to operate close to the saltwater. There's a term called the saltwater effect for vertical antennas. It's completely up to the individual. Really, the planning is the enjoyable part. For example, coming up April 7th, I'll start, what kind of place do I want to pick? Am I going to bring my pet, Susie, with me? Am I going to be in town, or do I want to go 70 miles away to something interesting? So it's completely open, and it's whatever the individual wants to use for a venue.
So what bands have you found successful with this, and also what time of day have you chosen for your 4 hours?
All right. Well, I generally start off in the morning, usually when the park opened, 8 o'clock. I'll usually kick off with 40 meters, really kind of work in Envis. I have a friend about 100 miles away in Dothan, Alabama, Thomas. And so 40-meter Envis And that use takes more of an antenna, generally. Usually the morning, and also for radar to radar, Eddie in South Africa and Tom in Great Britain. Earlier is better because it's kind of late afternoon for them. So you want to have that opportunity to make a radar to radar between continents.
And so that's where some of your bonus points come in. So you mentioned what's the point structure?
Well, you essentially get QSO points, and then radar to radar contacts. Between continents, it's like 10 points. And that's really difficult to come up with, but it's really, it's one of the goals. Eddie is also involved with satellites, so he threw satellites into the mix. And that's something that I had never done. And I guess I was inspired, learned something about portable satellite operating. And so over the last year or so, I've gotten into that, and that is another bonus. And also using a digital mode like PSK31 is a bonus for the first contact you make that way. Also, things are set up to encourage you to be moving. You can be a fixed station. You could be a portable station, but there's a multiplier of 3 for actually being a moving radar station. So that's how the points add up. But I've really found that I'm not so much competing against other people, but more comparing what I do to previous outings, things like that. So it's more of a challenge than a contest, and the rules are just to stretch your capabilities, and I call it a stress test. I know, John, that you're involved with emergency communications, and really there's a lot in common between radar, emergency communications. Instead of having a served agency, on my part, I'm just doing it for fun.
Yeah, that's one thing I always say. If you want to figure out what's not going to work, be put under some type of pressure to make it work. So what has been the most challenging part of radar you've found?
Actually, the challenging part is making these choices. It's actually fun, but it's also challenging, and also just being lucky that I can get those 5 contacts. It's any which way you can. If there's nobody on 40 meters, you better go to 20. If there's nobody on CW, you better check out phone. If there's some kind of on-the-air activity, it may not be radar, but you may want to get into it. So I have been doing it a while, but I have so much equipment that, frankly, deciding what I'm going to take on a particular outing is challenging.
Your term of mobile between the 2 points, you can select whether, like you said, it's whether by vehicle or by foot. You've chosen to go by vehicle?
Almost always, I've done it by foot. And so when you go by foot, the simplest thing is to just have a backpack. But then you'll say, well, I need to bring along some stuff. So you may pull a cart. And what you find on the beach is that a cart, it can slow you down quite a bit because they don't roll so well through the sand. I thought I would mention that I've listened to some podcasts that mention something called a flow state, or being in the zone. It's a very pleasurable thing when your capabilities and skills on a given day is matching the challenge. In other words, you're getting those 5 contacts. You are making good time to your next stop, and you set up and make the next 5. I find other people do other things in amateur radio, like contesting and so forth, and they kind of get into a zone. For me, that zone is when it's really clicking and I can get like 4 locations within the 4 hours. That's a lot of fun.
I can see what you're saying by getting in the zone. And the ironic thing is, it's always that first contact. After you get set up and you actually make your first contact, then all of that self-imposed doubt that, am I hooked up right? Am I tuned right? Is my antenna working? Is my radio working? Do I have the volume on? All those things kind of go away. And it's the first contact always seems to be the hardest. And I don't know if that's just a perception or if it's a reality that once you do get that first contact, then it seems like you said things start flowing as it goes.
Right. Of course, if that first contact come, you're really going to get worried. But usually it does. Now, the radar challenge, you can do things radar style anytime that you want. So it's wide open to practice this. And really, anytime you deploy outdoors, it is a test, and it's somewhat preparation for doing radar. So you may not be able to have time to go out and do the walking, but by setting up and doing it over and over, and so there's all kinds of activities, activating parks, doing SOTA, field day, all these activities. They may not be exactly the same use case, so to speak, as radar, but you're getting familiar with your equipment and operating techniques and so forth. So that really helps. So it's kind of a all-encompassing thing to get involved with your equipment. Also, there are other people. We have a Google Plus community for radar. And so you're seeing what other people do and their ideas. And so it kind of inspires us to keep going. And there's a lot of sharing in the community. So we're all trying to help each other.
So that was one of the questions I was going to ask is your success is determined by your level of preparation. And then, like you said, then it's your skill and some luck. But so you recon out your areas and then also you practice your setup. Because you are on foot, how many different antennas, because it seems like that's the thing you need to vary if you're not having success, is changing up your antenna. How many antennas do you carry and what are they?
There is this syndrome, which is carrying as much as you can carry, which is very dangerous. I've been bitten by that. But the ones that I usually end up using, if I'm near salt water, I'll take a vertical, build out of Chameleon products. I've got a vertical called the Bravo 7K, and I've got the buddy stick and so forth. So if I'm going, and I purposely choose to be near saltwater, verticals are really good antennas in that situation. Of course, as far as the pack-up, the Alex Loop, I made a whole lot of use out of that. I also have a dipole. The trick is that I have just many I've kind of like tried them all, but the vertical, the mag loop, dipole, sometimes I use the trees, but getting involved with the trees can actually eat up a lot of time. So those are the general categories. So I probably would take about 3 antennas, I think. Now, actually, didn't mention radios. You know, the KX3 from Elecraft was just, hey, this is a great all-around radio, and it's just the thing for radar. Well, that is true until they came up with the KX2, and that is even better. In fact, the radio may be practically the smallest thing in my packup. A KX2 is very small. And I have actually used a whip antenna with a KX2, and you can hold it like a HT and drag a small counterpoise wire. And I've used that for radar, particularly near saltwater, and I've had a lot of success with that. So I think the fun is making that choice, and there would be no set choice for anyone. You can always get a new antenna idea and try it out.
So you mentioned that sometimes taking too many antennas can bite you. Is it because you don't make that first contact and you start questioning your antenna and you spend a lot of time changing antennas?
Not so much. It's just, what if my smaller antenna doesn't work? Maybe I want the bigger one. I took a trip to California. I took every antenna I had for portable use. But I guess, in a sense, well, what if my smaller antenna doesn't work? Maybe I should have a few more tricks in my bag. Maybe one of them breaks, and maybe I should have a backup. And there is a very small, lightweight antenna by LNR that is a trail-friendly end-fed. That's also a great antenna. You just need something to hold up the wire.
Yeah, there's some great small portable antennas out there. You know, our friend from the Workbench, George, and his Pactana Mini, he's got a new one coming out, the linked dipole that's pack friendly. And I think it's just a great time to be in the hobby. Like when you said, your radio is the lightest thing in your pack. And now that you think of that even 5 years ago or 15 years ago, I think it's a great time to be in the hobby. What's your power?
I'm a big fan of the lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're compared to lead acid batteries. They're just way ahead. And I know that you interview BioNO people. They make great batteries. They know me very well because I have several of them. So that's really kind of the battery of choice. The amazing thing is the KX2 has lithium ion batteries. They're small and it can go right in case of the radio. There's a lot of power in just that little 3-cell battery, and then you can carry a spare. Overall, the lithium iron phosphate, also lithium ion batteries in the KX2 are just awesome.
So what is the typical QSO exchange for a radar?
Well, basically, signal report, your call sign, your name, and a grid locator. And Eddie is really big on grid locators because they can actually show your movement as you're doing radar. He really encourages us to use a grid of 8 to 10 characters. That's a good goal. So one problem you have is knowing what your grid square is to that precision. And there is an app for Android phones. It's called Ham GPS. So you can use your smartphone as an aid to do that. Now, ideally, you would exchange grid locators, particularly if you're radar to radar, but sometimes you'll lose people if you're going to give them a 10-character grid. So you kind of use your judgment on that. That's the gist of the exchange. There's a focus on being able to communicate those items effectively.
So if you're listening to this and you've kind of dabbled in the world of field radio and you want to get involved and be a participant in radar, how does one get started, and how do you submit your logs and information?
Alrighty. Well, Google is your friend. Eddie has a website with the rules. He's always posting tips and reflections on radar. There's a website, radarops.co.za. Also, we have a Google Plus group if you're into that. So if you Google Rapid Deployment Amateur Radio on Google, the Google Plus group is going to show up. The key is finding the rules. I usually put a copy on my website, which is n4kgl.info. So once you find the rules, that will answer a lot of questions for you. And then, I'd encourage people to take a look at how other people are doing radar, and basically going to take getting out in the field and as much as you can and kind of challenging yourself, and take any opportunity to operate outdoors. And then you'll get to look forward to these radar challenges like the rest of us in the community.
What would be your top takeaways on if someone was looking to do this in a couple weeks? What are a couple keys to success?
I think the key to success, even if you have just a couple weeks, is if you're kind of out of practice for portable operating, it will be setting your gear up, even if it's in your front yard. And that's a real good way to know if you're ready, is by setting up your gear in your front yard or any opportunity you have. You can get started really without the optimum equipment. You're probably going to change your equipment over time. So I would say it's doing a practice run, gathering your equipment and making sure it works. And then you can think about a bit about your venue and whether you're going to need supports for your antennas or you're going to use the trees. So give some thought to what your situation will be. And I would say that even if you only get out to one location during the challenge, that you're going to learn a whole lot. It will kind of build some excitement for the next go around and your next practice run. So it just feeds on itself. It's kind of a cycle of gather your equipment, try it out, make some contacts, figure out what works, and then make adjustments from there.
That's some really good advice to load out your gear at home and figure out what works and what doesn't. Even if it's taking all of your gear and going into the kitchen and then pack it all together and then unpack it and try and assemble it without going back to your shack to find the pieces you forgot. And take that a step further and go out in your front yard or go, to a park. Don't go somewhere far. Just try loading out your gear and setting it up and identifying what you don't have and what you didn't need. And like you said, that refining comes with some practice. And so before we wrap up, let's see, it's April, when's the next one? April 7th?
April 7th. The first Saturday in April, then the first Saturday in November, and the third Saturday of July.
Is there anything else you want to give us, your pearls of wisdom for those of us that are going to try this for the first time this year?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people, it's not for everyone. It takes some level of fitness, but if you love the outdoors, you're going to enjoy being in the outdoors. And I think it's a step for some people to say, okay, I'm all set up at my nice location by the lake. Why do I want to tear it down and move to another location? And the only thing I can say is you probably won't know until you try it. So I think that's the key. Give it a try. And I'm an advocate for outdoor operating. There's not soda here. One advantage to RaDAR is you can use almost any venue that's legal to go to. And RaDAR, like I say, it's a stress test, and it will actually make things like field day, other demonstrations of amateur radio, things like that. It'll make them a lot easier.
Yeah, this sounds like a great event to maybe take you out of your comfort zone a little. And just try, like you said, put a little stress on the situation and see if you can go to the task. And if it's your first time out and you bomb miserably, then that's always learning, finding out how to improve next time. So, Greg, thank you for coming on the show. I will include in the links below the official RaDAR site, and then also your Google Plus group and other links you provided, your blog, your YouTube channel, and people can get a hold of you and get a hold of the group and for more information. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
All right. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. And I was excited to see Field Radio podcast, and the collection of videos, podcasts that you have is all applicable to RaDAR. So you've got a resource right there.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, we were talking about this. I looked for my first RaDAR challenge video. that I think I'll do that this year and put it to video, and so people can kind of see my first opportunity to try and set up and move rapidly. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Good luck with RaDAR.
Thank you once again, Greg, for coming on the show and giving us a look at the RaDAR Challenge. The show notes are full of links to visit for more information on the RaDAR Challenge, and also his personal blog and YouTube channel and Google group. You can find all the links in the show notes at fieldradiopodcast.org. For the training item, I thought I would share some information that I discovered on the internet from a person who had put some reflection points on his experience and his family's experience during Hurricane Sandy. He made a list of items of his experience. In this training item, I read off his list. Hello, this is John W7DBO with the training item. I came across a list of items from Franz Otzman with lessons learned from his experiences in Hurricane Katrina. I find looking past at personal experiences during disasters can help drive our compass in emergency preparedness. I will read the short version. If you want the full version of his list, you can go to my website at w7dbo.net. The excitement and coolness wears off around day 3. You were never really prepared to go weeks without power, heat, water, etc. Never. Just because your generator is running does not mean it is producing electricity. A couple of cases of bottled water is not water storage. I was surprised how quickly normal social behavior goes out the window. I am not talking about someone cutting in line at the grocery store. 3 people were killed at gas stations within 50 miles of my home. Cash is king. All the money in your savings means nothing. You eat a lot more food when you are cold. You need more food than you think if your kids are out of school for 2 weeks. Think of things that are a comfort to you, your escape, a cup of hot chocolate, a glass of milk, a ding-dong before bed. Stock up on those too. You will need that comfort after day 3. You quickly become the guy in the neighborhood who knows how to wire a generator to the electrical panel, directly wire the furnace to a small generator, or get the well pump up and running on an inverter power. Or you are the guy whose master's degree in accounting suddenly means nothing. A woman who can cook a fine meal by candlelight over the barbecue or an open fire is worth her weight in gold. It takes a lot of firewood to keep a fire going all day and into the evening for heat. All the food storage in the world means nothing if your kids won't eat it. You might be prepared to take care of your children and their needs, but what about when the neighborhood children start showing up at your door? Although neighbors can be a great resource, they can also be a huge drain on your emergency storage. You need to know how you're going to handle that. It is real easy to be the guy who shares on day 3, not so easy on day 11. This is just reality speaking. Fathers, all the money you have ever made means nothing if you can't keep your kids warm. Mothers, everything you have ever done for your kids is forgotten if your kids are hungry. When it gets dark at 4:30 p.m., the nights are really long without power. Getting out of the house is very important, even if it's cold outside. Make your home the semi-warm place to come home to and not the cold prison that you were stuck in. There was a strange piece of knowing all I had to do each day was keep my family safe, warm, and fed, but my piece was someone else's panic. I hope you found this inflection on modern-day emergency helpful in realizing your physical and mental preparedness for disaster. You can read the full list on my website at w7dbo.net. This is John, W7DBO, with the training item. That will do it for this episode. Thank you once again, Greg Lane and for KGL for coming on and speaking to us about the RaDAR Challenge. And also for you, the listener, thank you for listening. This will do it for this episode. As always, please send me your comments, feedback, and show ideas to john@fieldradiopodcast.org. 73.